We're going to call the Chino City Council and the successor agency to the redevelopment agency to order this evening, March 12th. Please note that all council members are present. Councilman Burton, would you like to lead us in the flag salute?
Place your right hand over your heart. Repeat after me. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. First item on our agenda is public communication. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council on any item that's not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we have no written request to speak. Our item under discussion is economic development update. This is to receive an update on our economic development trends, tools, and opportunities in the city. Staff report will be provided by our Assistant City Manager, Jackie Melendez, and by Ken Hira, President of Cosmont Companies.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss economic development in the city of Chino. This evening, our workshop will focus on the tools, trends, and opportunities impacting the local economy here in Chino. Tonight, we will focus on building strategies for business attraction and expansion in the commercial and retail sectors, which includes entertainment, sports, and experiences for families and adults. We'll be highlighting predominantly areas of the city in the northern part of the city, but also a couple other places as well. Maintaining and providing meaningful shopping, dining, and retail experiences for residents is the hallmark of any robust community. People make memories in our shopping centers, whether it be to celebrate a graduation or anniversary in one of our restaurants, to buy new clothes for back to school, or gifts for loved ones during the holidays. Here, we are fortunate to have some of the best names in retail and restaurants called Chino Home, and a large army of small businesses who make our city great. In the Preserve, we have a beautiful new shopping center anchored by Stater Brothers, currently under construction. They are bringing in new and exciting shopping opportunities. The Spectrum has long been an important economic engine in our city, serving as a popular retail destination for not only the residents, but also those from surrounding cities, and that's been occurring since it first opened. All around the city, we have new businesses popping up and even more opportunity to offer our residents new experiences. Today, the retail landscape is changing. Online ordering is changing the looks of malls, shopping centers, and our lifestyle. People want more when they step out of their home for dining, to recreate, to celebrate, or to have a date night. These trends provide challenges and opportunities. With a current population of 95,000 and an anticipated major milestone of hitting 100,000 by 2028, our city is growing, and we are faced with the challenge of managing that growth while also maintaining and keeping all that we love about Chino. Tonight, we have invited Ken Hira from Cosmont Companies to help us navigate these trends with an eye for finding opportunity. Cosmont is a leader in economic development, helping communities across the state of California navigate new trends, changing laws, and teaching new tools for tackling challenges. During the presentation, you will notice a note that reads draft for discussion. That is the purpose of this workshop, to have a discussion. No action is needed. We will receive and file. With that, I turn the microphone over to Mr. Ken Hira for a presentation, and we will both be available at the end for questions.
Thank you, Jackie.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Mayor, members of the council. My name is Ken Hira with Cosmont Companies. It's great to be here tonight in person. And we're going to kind of sort of divide the discussion into a macro discussion about some of the trends, if you will, in economic development and tools. It's a discussion that our company is having with lots of cities and in lots of different sort of panel discussions with the League and CalEd and other audiences. And so we want to share that as a sort of stream of consciousness of what's happening today in the marketplace. The more specific part of our discussion tonight is the initial evaluation of some of the shopping centers, if you will, specifically, that we'll call them not at their highest and best use. There's opportunity. And I think there's lots of opportunity in the city. And we're going to focus in on those centers necessarily tonight, but there's a lot more that we'd like to collaborate with you all on. And I've also got my colleague Bobby Valenti here, and so we can answer any questions if you have them. But let me get started. Let's see. So, like I say, there's a unique opportunity for the economic future of Chino. There's the priority areas for revitalization, reinvestment, redevelopment potentially. The access to economic development tools. You know, we don't have redevelopment anymore. It's been gone for over 10 years. So we want to try to utilize current tools and funding sources, and also realizing that we're in a post-pandemic era and a post-pandemic timeframe, and we can talk more about that. But there is a new economic development toolkit and new funding sources. And to move forward in a more sustainable way, private investment will be important to the city. Private investment is important to all cities, for that matter. So this notion of trying to bridge the gap between the public and private sectors is an area where we've spent a lot of time in trying to help cities. So there's strategies involved in that, and that's the things that we'd like to continue to work with you on. So just to set the stage in sort of the reconfigured economy, you've got at least three groups of folks that are influenced and have influence on everything that's happening today. Consumers. Consumers are driven by quality of life, cost of living, amenities. Consumers change rapidly, and they use things like technology, and they use things that are current to be more current. So we have to really realize who the consumer is. Is it the millennial population? For a few years ago, for a while, we were talking about the 80 million millennials in our country and how much spending power they had, $750 million. I mean, there's so much buying power that the young population has as they're growing and maturing. The Gen Zs are also catching up and spending lots of money. So they want things more instantaneously, if that makes sense, and they want experience. The investors, the private sector, the private investment market, driven by technology, shifting demands, as we've just discussed, supply chain anomalies, and of late, really affected by, say, interest costs. So the development world has been challenged for feasibility of projects, if you will, new projects, because of how high cost of construction have become and how high the interest costs have become. So are we in a mini recessionary period? We were grappling with that. I think things are going to turn the corner and start to come back a little bit as the financial markets change. But the investment community and the private sector are an important audience as well. And then, of course, local governments. Local governments are certainly faced with not the least of which are state policies and state mandates and regional housing requirements and zoning, new zoning pressures, if you will. So there's compliance matters that lots of communities and cities, like the city of Chino, will have to grapple with, and the local control, the control that you all have as a body of leaders for the city. There's lots of words on lots of slides. I know that I'm not going to read each of these, but here's the notion behind how much things have changed. And the big premise and the big headline is that we're sort of in a land use revolution. All asset classes have changed: residential, retail, industrial, office, hospitality. And they've all had an impact on communities, zoning, land use, projects, tax revenues, job creation. But here are the trends that we see. Housing is not a loss leader. Housing has become an economic development tool. And I'll just say this: underneath the roof of a home, we used to just sleep. And then all of a sudden, with the internet and Amazon, we started to shop. And now a lot of us are actually working. So the home represents not just where a family is raised, but it's also a retail resource for cities and a job creation resource for cities. If you're commuting 2 days a week, you're working from home 3 days a week. Retail. Retail isn't just retail anymore. Retail has been the most dynamic asset class, in my opinion, throughout history. It's always changed, and I think it's mainly been driven by the consumer. And it's driven by the consumer because we get to pick and choose what we like, what we don't like. We're fickle. And then today, we have these things which are part of the technological boom that allows us to do all kinds of shopping and communicating. So retail has really evolved. Retail today is about experience. We have to create places and placemaking that can create better experience for the consumer. And that's what retail is. Retail is also blending with other land uses, and it's also needing to right size. If you've got centers, retail centers that are too big, we need to find better land uses that can integrate within those centers that are too big so they can get right sized as well. Teleworking, this concept of us, again, working from home, et cetera, it's sort of here to stay, whether it's 4 days a week that you're at home or 1 day a week that you're home. So it's had a major impact on the office market. And then industrial. Industrial isn't one size fits all, and the notion of last mile delivery and fulfillment and e-commerce is really driving demand for industrial in different shapes and sizes. It's not just million square footers or 500,000 footers. It's really at all different sizes and categories of the types of industrial that make sense today based on distribution. We used to be motivated by sales tax and big box retail, creating jobs in large office parks, avoiding the concept of industrials and putting it in a zoning category that's far from the center of town, so to speak. And then residential development was always seen as this loss from a fiscal perspective. But there's a new reality today, as I've just discussed. New sales tax revenue opportunities by driving trips, creating local jobs and making it more attractive for folks who actually their wallets are staying in town more often. Infill industrial and online delivery and job creation opportunities. And then, of course, residential and the density that comes with it, high property values, et cetera. So when we look at retail shopping centers, and I have a retail background, what's important for me is I can't just look at a retail center anymore and just say, all right, let me make 10 phone calls and I'll get new tenants for it. That's sort of what we used to be able to do. But now we have to be a lot more creative, which is why we look at things holistically, which is why we look at things on all asset class levels, because hospitality, hotels are another category of very high tax revenue generating uses, and your general fund doesn't necessarily enjoy a lot of transient occupancy tax. Well, that to me could be an area of opportunity to drive some of those revenues and jobs and land uses, as an example. How do we capture value in our economy? The bigger isn't better from a retail perspective. Physical office we've talked about. State mandates are driving a lot of the changes. Revenue implications, again, sales tax tied to more specialized uses. If services aren't generating sales tax like they used to, they are driving traffic and trips. Restaurants have become almost, an anchor tenant, if you will, or set of anchor tenants, because we're going out to eat a lot more often. I think several years ago, 5 years ago, and I'm very involved in the ICSC, which is the retail shopping center industry group. For the first time in our country, grocery sales were less than restaurant sales. So in the aggregate, restaurant sales exceeded your traditional grocery shopping patterns. So we look at that, and that's part of experience. Property taxes that are tied to housing and density, and then, of course, grants. Grants for energy, grants for resiliency, grants for affordable housing. So we have a lot of categories of the toolkit, but for us, it's about capturing value. If it's creating a tax increment financing district to pay for infrastructure, capture the value. If it's about using zoning strategies to make sure zoning becomes more flexible so land uses can evolve, that's, I think, a burden on the part of cities to really take a look at their zoning and think about how it can be more flexible. But in doing so, there's an opportunity to capture value. There's a tool we've used called Development Opportunity Reserve, and it's the idea of providing density for the trade-off, which is community benefits. Those community benefits could be higher quality retail. It could be trail investment. It could be public improvements. It could be agriculture. It could be other parts of the community that are priorities to the community. Capturing value through properties. If you own real estate, there can be a way to capture that value. And then sales tax, assessment revenue, which is an in lieu concept, government financing strategies, and then grants and other public monies. So there's detail to each of these tools. I won't go into them in too much depth, but there's examples and more specifics about each of those and what they are, and then the action that can be taken to apply those tools. So more specifically to the city, what's important to us, and you may know your demographics, of course, but what's important to us is to help us get educated on the DNA of the city of Chino. So 95,000 folks, median age of 35, high bachelor degrees, so there's a high level of education at almost 30%, bachelor degree or greater, 123,000 bucks of average household income. Retailers and businesses and developers look at these metrics. They look at these metrics, they look at the intersections on which your shopping centers are located, they look at traffic counts, they look at patterns. They want to know the DNA of the consumer and of the constituent in cities. So this data becomes very important. And then you have a net inflow of folks coming to work every day. So you have a job base here, which is pretty positive, all things considered. We looked at the inventory and vacancy and rents for the different asset classes. Retail has a relatively high vacancy, 4.8 million square feet. Office has a reasonable vacancy, but it's not a very big market at 1 million square feet. Industrial, as you can tell, at 56 million square feet is substantial. It's a big part of the tax revenue that gets created. It's a big part of the job creation. And at a 5.6% vacancy, it's a very, very, very stable asset class, all things considered, likely with more demand. And then multifamily at 4,000 units and a 6.3% vacancy. The graph to the right is trying to indicate where your revenues come from, and we tend to look at this. I tend to focus on property tax, sales tax, and hotel tax, or TOT. Some of the averages in the state historically have been about 42% from property tax. Of the revenues that your general fund enjoys, about 42% of those revenues tend to come from property tax. About 22% come from sales tax, and about 8% historically have come from hotel tax. You have a very low hotel tax component to your general fund. Again, that can imply opportunity. Your sales tax at 33% is higher necessarily than the averages of what we've seen historically. So you rely on sales tax, fine. Let's make sure we understand, well, where are those vacancies and how important are those retailers or auto dealerships that are generating those types of sales tax, because those are the big users that tend to do that. And then at 30%, your property tax is slightly lower, right? A little bit lower than that 40-some-odd% that most other cities tend to experience. So we mapped out the 5 different shopping centers. Each of these have a unique set of circumstances and areas for us to try to focus on. Lots of data about each center. I won't dig into it. There's even more information that we ascertained. But as an example, I'll look at a power center that's 500,000 square feet, and having a retail background, that used to be great, used to be a big sales tax revenue generator. Now it makes me a little bit nervous, because I want to know, in 500,000 square feet, how many folks are doing $200 to $300 a foot in sales? That's a healthy margin, or a healthy threshold. What's the vacancy look like? What are the rents? How is the landlord doing? Is the landlord a good landlord, bad landlord? However you want to put it. Are they operating a center at a first-class level? Yes or no? The center just sold to another landlord, another owner, and so there's going to need to be a lot of work on, we'll call it business retention, right? There's business attraction, business retention, business expansion. This is going to be an important one to make sure that business retention is focused on, so that we keep the anchors happy, so to speak. How's Target doing? They're a big anchor here. Target's been doing pretty good, all things considered. Out of the pandemic, several tenants didn't do well. Several tenants did well. And so the general merchandisers and the home improvement folks did pretty good out of the pandemic, and they still seem to be relatively healthy. So Target will be an important component here. Burlington, of course, and other discount retailers, some of which are doing fine, but it's going to be one to keep a close eye on from a leasing perspective. So that's kind of what the opportunity is collaborate with the new owner on leasing opportunities, and or if there's an area to do some blended use or mixed use development on the site. Rancho del Chino North, this is a very interesting property. You know, historically, your Home Depots of the world were doing great, and your JCPenney's were expanding and growing, and we know that the department store business is not what it used to be. So the JCPenney's and the Sears and the Macy's of the world are really not at the, at a highest and best use themselves. Well, that vacant JCPenney's is going to be a tough one to just fill. Call a retailer, replace it. It's not how it works anymore. But it's also darn good real estate, well located. I assume Home Depot does pretty good. Home Depot has a lot of restrictions in the center, so they get to make the call through some CC&Rs and lease restrictions on what you can do next door. That makes it challenging. So how do we fit the square peg in the square hole when Home Depot, thinks the hole's round? And that's part of that challenge. But I think it's an opportunity more than it's a problem. We just have to find the right mix and the right redevelopment opportunity, the right revitalization strategy. So we had some ideas about opportunities, but that one to me is, hey, let's go to work and try to help. Is there another hospitality use to go there? I don't know. I doubt it's going to be a singular use. That's my point. Central Plaza Shopping Center. It's always tough when there are multiple property owners in a center because you've got to get them to agree to certain things, and they have different motivations. So this is one that's going to need, again, a different type of work, but it needs site enhancements. Its image needs to be upgraded. Are there ways for the city to help? Are there ways for city to create some rules and regulations on, what the center, how at what level it should operate? So that's a discussion to potentially have. I also want to point out that in each of these centers, I haven't focused on it, but the colorful sort of amoeba trade area that's in the middle is driven by a data source called Placer AI. I'll spend a second on that. Placer AI is an anonymized mobile data analytic platform that I think tracks 30 million smartphones. And sorry, but wherever we go, we're trackable. And the good news about that is it gives us, as economic developers and cities, a tremendous amount of information to be educated by. The bad news is anybody that's tracked may not want to be tracked, but we are. That's just the nature of technology today. So we're actually able to see where folks are coming from to the center. And we actually can take a look at their demographics. We can figure out sort of who they are anonymously. But it helps understand, are they coming from near or far? Are they coming often or less frequently? Are their trips, the trajectory of the trips down or are they up? And that kind of data and the length of stay, et cetera, that kind of data is very helpful for us to assess the centers and the opportunity areas. In all 5 of them, we have that data. The Cardenas Center, very thin center off the street, not deep, tough for redevelopment, but there could be some redevelopment opportunity. This one's one where we should be talking to the grocer to understand, how's your operations? Are you going to reinvest in your store? Is the landlord going to reinvest in your store? Because you're an important part of the community. Grocers have become, are essential, even though the restaurant business is really, really important. The grocery business is really important. During the pandemic, the grocers are the ones that, as you know, we all stood in line to make sure we got some goods. So the grocers become really important to communities, and they can make a big difference for the shorter and the closer trade areas. And that's what we find with Placer. You've got a much closer trade area. coming to that grocery store. Central Chino Plaza, another one, multiple property owners, probably one that could also benefit from some site enhancements and opportunities for new retailers. So I'll wrap up just by trying to identify some next steps. Our company, Cosmont, is really in the middle or at the beginning of a process to help the city and working collaboratively with staff. So this isn't a report and it's sort of like good luck. This is just getting started, if you will, opportunity for us to work together. So some next steps are continued property owner collaboration. It's very important. Property owners, businesses, brokers, developers, and be engaged with them. Market feasibility and financial feasibility analysis, and then explore some of the economic development strategies. Business attraction, I mentioned earlier, of course, business attraction, business retention, business retention and expansion as well. So developing some marketing material can be very important and effective for your city. Infrastructure, making sure we know what are your infrastructure needs and what are the sources of those funding strategies, grants, districts, et cetera. And we've worked very closely with cities on that. And then stakeholder engagement, make sure we're communicating, if you will, with your community and your constituents and with you all so that we're collaborating and we're getting good direction from everybody. Getting some feedback and then taking those, whether it's through surveys or otherwise, and applying them as they're appropriate. I'll stop there. Summary presentation of some of the material we've gathered to date, and certainly available for questions and discussion. Thank you.
It's a lot of information. Comments or questions? Council members? Chris, anything? Mark, anything? Karen?
Mr. Hero, I want to thank you for your presentation today. This is probably a subject throughout the city that's spoken about a lot. We have a lot of commercial shopping centers in town that are probably at a minimum over 20 years old. And being a long-term resident of Chino, I remember a day and an age and a time when those shopping centers were vital gathering places for us, and we enjoyed going to them. I'm not saying we don't still enjoy going to them today, but as you stated in your presentation, they're as the economy and things are changing, they're no longer serving us to our maximum efficiency in town. And I think what we've been devoid of is a plan and a strategy to work with our commercial tenants in this capacity and come up with a strategy to help them retool them to serve us better into in the next decade or two for the future. So it's exciting to me. This is a lot of heavy lifting. This is really complex work. But if we don't start by sitting down and talking about it and getting our minds around it as a community, then there's no strategy for it. So I'm excited to hear that we want to sit down, not just as a city, but with our commercial owners and try and figure out a way in order to make these centers serve us better in the future. Not only, it's not just about the revenue for us, but it's also about just serving our residents, our community, what their needs are in these centers moving forward. So I'm excited about it. It's going to be hard work, and this is not the short game by any means. I do understand this is the long game, but that's what this is about. Sitting down here and come up with a strategy to make our city more vital and more economically beneficial to us in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Curtis?
Thanks, Ken, for being here. I listened to the presentation, and I appreciate all the information. And it just causes all kinds of questions that be generated in my mind, getting into the nuts and the bolts, the real deep nuts and bolts, like specifically, you see the trends change throughout the region, and you see what works real well for some communities and they don't work well for other communities. But you see the same types of trends. How do you get the property owners, how do you motivate them to change with what's going on in the region instead of just staying stagnant within their own little areas? How do you do that?
It's really a good question. It's not an easy answer. I think about, say, the Chino Preserve. Totally different case study, if you will. Credible master plan community, call it single property owner, single developer, single master developer, if you will. And can master plan housing and retail and other land uses that make sense. Seems easy, but I'm pretty sure that the Chino Preserve has taken, how many years? It's a long time.
Over 30 years.
And that's just part of that process. With existing landowners, I don't want to predict 30 years out that things are going to change, don't get me wrong. But specific plans can get created that help with environmental clearances and vision and new rules, okay? That's one way. And then there's some tools that you can put into those types of plans or strategies, master plans. Or the city can take a look at other economic development strategies, as I talked about, look at your zoning and try to understand, okay, well, can we apply some zoning strategies to the current zoning that helps motivate, maybe not the current property owner, but the third-party investor who could be a buyer or an investor in a property. At some point, the motivation of property owners who are passive, I do think, evolves. I think it's going to take creative, roll up your sleeves, patient effort on the part of cities. At least to me, what we're doing tonight and what we're doing in general is the right thing by evaluating these centers that are not at their highest and best use. So we got to go talk to them. We got to see what really motivates them. It's not easy. It doesn't happen overnight. I live in a community. There's 14 owners in the shopping center, right across from City Hall. I was in a meeting with 14 property owners. Do you know how many of them agreed on something? 0. Or maybe 2 of them thought one thing was a good idea, but that means you've got another 12. And in that instance, just as an example, the city elected to purchase a vacated property and said, you know what, we're going to create the center of the universe for our community, and we're going to be catalytic to help get one of the 14, not in a passive role. So there's some unique circumstances and some creative thought processes that are going to have to take place, and some patience. I'll say this also. There's some rules, and then there's some tools, if that makes sense. Some might call that carrot and stick. There wants to be some motivation and incentives, I think, for property owners. Maybe it's a co-investment strategy on your part. Let me help pay for some facade improvement upgrades. Let me help pay for some branding and imaging, but maybe on a matching basis. Maybe you invest in some of your real estate in order to get somebody else to also invest. Or you create some rules that say if you don't invest, we have a problem with that. And we have to do something about it, on a more strict basis. So it's nuanced, it's not overnight, it's a long game. Somebody said that, I think. We know that it's a long-term process. But I think if we're not focused on it, I'll just also say the do-nothing strategy is the wrong thing to do. In the same instance where that city bought a vacant retail box and is now trying to reimagine it and actually reinvent it as a community-oriented public space, it was a 5-0 vote. And they made a big bet on the investment for it. And I was one that stood up at the council meeting to say, doing nothing is the wrong thing here, because it's going to continue to evolve into something that's not highest and best use and worse. So I think we're doing the right thing by talking about it, thinking about it, and then applying all the tools that we possibly can today.
Thank you, Ken.
I'm excited that you're here, and I'm excited that you're helping us. I love master plans, especially living master plans, because like you said, if you don't do anything, you're going to deteriorate. That's my term. But to have a master plan gives you a goal to reach for, and maybe you'll get there, maybe you won't get there, but at least you have something at the end of the road that you're trying to achieve. We get a lot of requests from our constituency. There isn't anything to do in town. If we want to go on a date night, we go out of town. If we want to go get something to eat at 10 o'clock at night, we have to go somewhere else. kids. We don't have enough for our young people to do. So I think, looking around at some of the creative things other communities have done, they have like indoor batting cages and indoor trampoline things and different venues for kids to go to with their parents. Maybe some of these big boxes that are vacant, maybe there's an opportunity for things like that. But if we don't look at something, we're never going to get anywhere. And so I think it's exciting that you're here to help us. One of your slides at the bottom when you talked about local government, you mentioned the tension, complying with state priorities versus achieving community priorities. And that is a constant nagging problem because the state wants to force us to do certain things that our constituency don't want. And so try to find a happy medium where your residents don't want to lynch you and yet the state doesn't want to come down and tell you exactly what to do. You mentioned cities being able to put money into things, but then we also have to be conscious of the gift to public funds. So we can't give money away either where somebody else is going to profit, a private industry is going to profit. So it's, we're kind of walking a tightrope when it comes to some of this. But I'm looking forward to ideas that you have. I mean, you are the experts that are getting involved in this with many other cities, and so I'm anxious to see what you can bring to us. We have one center in particular that we had a golden opportunity to bring a couple of businesses that one of them in particular really wants to be here, and I know that our town would really celebrate them getting here, but we just can't get the cooperation. And it's so frustrating because the business has set rules on what they follow, where they're going to locate, and this owner just won't cooperate, just doesn't see the future. So, hopefully you can help us improve these centers that have kind of deteriorated.
Sure, yeah.
Mark?
And also, in looking to the future, obviously, we want to look at some of the shopping centers that we have currently that are struggling. But there's commercial areas that we have designated in the city that haven't developed yet, and it's going to take a lot for us to be able to get them to a point where somebody's going to come in and develop it. So, for example, we're in the process of taking over Euclid Avenue. We're in the process of fixing Pine Avenue. We're in the process of fixing Euclid Avenue, with the hopes that that's going to be a major thoroughfare for the communities of Eastvale, obviously us, and the preserve isn't fully built out. It's still probably about 60% built out. And then you have Ontario Ranch also coming in. But we have land designation of a large commercial center that's going to be on the corner of Pine Avenue and Euclid Avenue. That, of course, all our industrial people want to develop into warehouses. But when we looked at the master plan for the preserve, that commercial center is one of the sales tax revenues that we were anticipating that would help us to offset the costs of some of the things that are going to happen in the future with roads and everything else that needs to be done in the preserve as time goes on. So I'd be curious to see what your ideas would be for us as a city, obviously knowing that we're going to do some of these improvements, we're going to fix some of the flooding that occurs down there, and we're going to make it a larger thoroughfare, but what else we can do to maybe start trying to incentivize some folks to actually start looking at this as a potential commercial center as opposed to an industrial center. And then when some of our future annexations of our county areas, such as Riverside Drive going over towards the 60 freeway, that's also another major thoroughfare coming into our community that also has some potential for some industrial or commercial that we can obviously utilize that will offset some of the costs of taking over some of the county area. So, I mean, I'd love to hear some of your ideas for some of these. We need to fix what we have currently, but what you might have in mind in the future so that we can start planning or start doing some things now that would incentivize some of these companies to look at some areas like that and start thinking what they can do to bring us some entertainment businesses and so on.
If I can comment to that, I would say road improvements, street improvements, the solution for flooding, if you will, but also circulation and traffic flow and beautification for that matter, and branding and imaging, it goes a long way, in my opinion. It's part of that public-private co-investment that I was sort of referring to before. The public sector making those types of investment inures to the benefit of the city, but inures to the benefit of the property owners and developers and landowners and businesses that can and should come into town. So that has a lot to do, I think, with paving the way for the future. How big the real estate is, what could go on a corner, what's absent in that trade area, how much is in the overall city and in what pockets, and what the traffic counts look like. Those are all the specifics of, hey, this is a neighborhood shopping center, or this is a blended use opportunity to develop. Because that intersection you mentioned is a very, very strong intersection. So it's worth, looking very closely at it from a land use perspective, and then understanding what can go there. Highest and best use for your community.
Any other comments? No? Chris?
The place where I get my hair cut at is located in one of these shopping centers that was talked about today. And mother and daughter run the operation, and one complaint I hear from them is, once this is revitalized, or once there's new development, we don't know where to go, we don't know what to do. And I also get from them that the property owner is communicating to them different messages, and part of those messages, it's the city's making us do this, the city's making us do that. So because of you guys, we gotta, think about what the next move is. And then I share, well, this is what I know from the city side, so there's a lot of mixed communication there. So I share all that to ask you, through this process, in terms of keeping current tenants in mind and at heart, if we could find an approach that, again, provides for a smoother transition for them, and at the same time, again, control our narrative of what the purpose and what the goal is, because I feel, at least for that particular shopping center and that particular business, there's mixed messages.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because there's tension. There's tension within the private sector, right? There's landlords and tenants that are probably constantly jockeying for a set of expectations. Is my rent going to go up? Is it not going to go up? How is my business doing? Are there people coming to the center? Is there an anchor tenant? Is there good traffic? Is there good signage, et cetera? And then couple that with the municipality, and folks sometimes like to point fingers. The reality of that is maybe that's a part of the tool that says, look, if we incentivize a new investor to go revitalize something, the city could say, hey, what's important to us is make sure we're keeping local businesses. What's important to us is that those local businesses aren't priced out of the market per se, because they create authenticity and they create a benefit to your community, particularly if someone's been there for a long time. A local barber shop, or hair salon, or local nail shop, or a local restaurant for that matter. So I think there's ways strategically for cities to try to manage that. It's not really easy, because you're in the middle of that private sector tension, if you will. And you want things to be revitalized, which is, the boat's rising with the tide rising. But there might be some ways to incentivize or require some a ratio of local businesses to be maintained.
That sounds really good. One comment, and then Karen wants to talk again. We have one shopping center that raised the rents to the point where they were pushing everybody out, and they've not refilled those slots. So sometimes there's a confusion, I know, on my part, as well as the public, and that's why are you raising rents, pushing people out, and then just leaving it vacant? And that's difficult for us to explain. I don't know what that shopping center's ultimate goal is. It makes no sense to anybody with common sense. So, yeah, I like your idea of somehow communicating with people too as we're going through this. I think that's valuable. Karen?
Thank you, Mayor. This isn't a one-size-fits-all strategy. There's been a lot of good points brought up here tonight, including by Councilmember Flores, as far as an education component as to why we have to change. I'd like to tell people that cities don't die some really cool Hollywood death scene, right? They die this tragic kind of slow death over a period of time if we don't change. And you made the mention tonight, if we don't change or evolve, just like anything else, like our households have over the time, they won't survive. So with that also comes a public education component, because there's a lot of businesses in those shopping centers that have just kind of the last men standing, as I would say. And that education component has to be explained as to why we have to be incentivized to change, that we can't keep going that way. But and I think the other part that's really been brought up tonight that's also important is the retail centers that have yet to be developed are the ones that we're going to annex into the city. So there are strategies here for longer term ones, because there are aging shopping centers in our community that are in dire need of retooling for the future, but ones that we have yet to realize that are going to be developed, in a different manner to serve our community moving forward. So there's a lot of heavy lifting here to be done, and a lot of work here to be done, and we're looking forward to working with you to come up with a strategy for all of it.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's a process. It's time consuming, and I wish things could change overnight. Sometimes we think they change overnight. Technologies, cars, electric vehicles, or otherwise, where we shop, where we go, how we live. Sometimes we look back and say, well, gosh, just yesterday it was X and now it's Y. But generally speaking, these things are time, and sometimes they happen more organically, and sometimes they happen with a lot more proactivity. And I think that's what's needed here on your part, which is the leadership. Again, this is what we're doing, is we're trying to be proactive about this process.
Well, I think also, we've always taken a lot of pride in putting money into our downtown, our old area, the old housing areas and stuff, to make sure the alleys are fixed and the streets are taken care of and that sort of thing. And not all the emphasis is on the new area, because we didn't want the old area to die. So when it comes to these older shopping centers, for me anyway, because I've been here a long time and watched, the evolution, it's just important to me to try to revitalize these older areas as it is to make sure the brand new areas are good. Because I don't want to leave behind a dying area and then all the emphasis be on the new, because that's not fair either. So, for me, we have this core within our community right around Philadelphia and Central, that all that area generally is kind of deteriorated. So if we move half a mile away and then put all the emphasis on something brand new, and this continues to die, I think we've done a disservice to our community. So again, I'm excited that Jackie, kind of located you guys and brought you on board to help us try to figure out where we're going, because I think it's just as important to take care of your older areas as it is your new areas. Karen?
Well stated, Mayor.
Anything else? Okay, well, thank you very, very much for being here this evening.
Well, thank you. Thanks for all your questions, comments, feedback, leadership. We appreciate it. Look forward to being back to continue to work with you all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Jackie?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Ken and Bobby for putting together the presentation and this evening, and thank you to the council for listening. We provided just a snapshot of the work that we do. We could nerd out on this all the time, because this stuff is really interesting. And I think the most important thing to say is there's not a one-size-fits-all. If it were that easy, then, we wouldn't have these challenges that we're talking about. So what works in one shopping center isn't going to work in another. It is long. There's some short-term strategies, medium-term strategies, and long-term strategies, which we navigate as the world is changing, as consumers are changing, as we are changing. But ultimately, it requires time and investment. We start with data, and then we start to think about, okay, how do we make sure that we're looking at all of these places and giving them their best chance in the industry? You hear best and highest use a lot. That's really important, but really what we're trying to do is give all the areas of our city their best chance. We can't do it all at once because it requires investment, and so we have to prioritize. We would like to see, all the shopping centers, but we would be here all night. So thank you for selecting these 5 to take a look at and provide that shopping center snapshot. And with that, we have a lot of work ahead of us, but we're excited, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And ultimately, our residents and our businesses, both new and the folks that have been here for a long time, are going to be are going to benefit. Thank you.
I agree, and I think a term that's always been really important to me too is balance. We want a good balance throughout our community, not all one-sided. So that's important as well. Now, before we adjourn, is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council on this item or anything else? Okay, seeing none, then we will adjourn to our next regular meeting that will be held on Tuesday, March 9th, 6 o'clock in these council chambers, with closed session starting no earlier than 4 o'clock if necessary. With that, we are adjourned.